Okay, I've always been fascinated with stopwatches, and I'm getting together a pretty good collection of them. This one I found on eBay. I couldn't pass it up, and it has a nice story, and it has a really nice mechanism inside called the movement. And so I want to talk about this watch and show you the movement. Not that I'm a watch expert, but there's some really cool mechanical things in here, I think, that everybody will really enjoy. And it's different than a lot of stopwatches. So this is a watch made by the company a Wakmann, W-A-K-M-A-N-N, and it is a Swiss company. It says Swiss right now at the bottom there. I'll show you maybe a little bit closer up. But it's part of the Breitling company. So Breitling made these watches and used the name Wakmann on them. This is the number 501 stopwatch. And it's a start, stop, reset. And the watch is not functioning quite right. It's not really functioning. And I'll show you why inside. It's a little bit above my comfort level to fix right now. I can fix some simple things in watches, but this one requires some special tools and some special expertise I just don't have yet. So I'm going to kind of put it on the shelf until I get a little bit better at fixing watches and maybe come back to this one. But I can enjoy it all by itself, just staring at it. So let me talk a little bit about it. So there's a standard 501 movement that Breitling made for these watches. And they have a history of making watches for avionics and military and stuff like that. And this particular stopwatch was made specifically for the U.S. military. And let me show you that on the back here. I'll zoom in a little bit farther later on. But it's stamped on the back year 1951. So this one was manufactured in 1951. And it has a serial number. And then it also has a contract number. So that contract number was with the U.S. government. So these were made specifically for the Korean War. And so the military wanted it to be better than the normal one. So they went to Breitling and they said, show me your watch. And they had a watch. Now, a lot of wristwatches and stuff are... you kind of know you have a good watch by the number of jewels in it. Those are the little sapphire pivot points inside watches. And a manually wound watch needs about 17 jewels. A auto wind watch, one that has a rotating weight inside of it, needs about 21 jewels, 23 jewels to be a good watch. I have a watch that has 43 jewels in it because has a chronometer built into it and everything, so it's real fancy. But they wanted a good stopwatch, and so normal stopwatches sometimes have 1 jewel, but typically good stopwatches have 7 jewels. That's like a standard number of jewels for stopwatches because they don't have as many parts, right? They don't have an hour hand, they don't have a bunch of other things, right? So you don't need as many jewels, and they are manually wound. So you don't need the typical 17 jewels that you find in a manually wound watch. But they made this one specifically. They went back and they retooled this particular 501 to have 15 jewels. So this one, it has 15 jewels just for the military. And they, like I said, were built as a special. Now the case here hinges open, and it says Wakmann Swiss on the inside of the case, and there's this real shiny bit here, and then there's a second hinge door, and you can see inside the watch, and that's where all the loveliness starts. It's a real shame that watches have all this really wonderful things inside of them, and the only person who gets to see them is the repairman. I guess you get to see it when you purchase it. So when you went to the factory and they looked at it and they said, "Oh, that looks pretty. Yeah, we'll buy that one." But otherwise, they're all sealed up, and you never get to see the insides of them. So most modern watches, they look kind of ugly inside, but the high-end watches still look real pretty inside. So let me zoom in a little bit before we get in there. So here's the back of the watch. Again, year 1951, serial number 36. That's pretty cool. So it's a very old. Now I don't know if every year they started over, maybe. So 1951 this was the 36th watch made, or maybe as part of the contract this was the 36th watch made. I don't know. It says it's nickel chromium plated. So it's a nickel base metal with chromium plate, I guess. I don't know. Maybe it's brass, nickel-plated brass with chromium on top. I don't know. Maybe it's nickel. I'm not sure. It is heavy, so it's either brass or nickel. So let's turn it over here. Let me focus on this. So it's got blued hands. I think those are heat blued. It has a minute hand and a second hand. And down at the bottom it says Swiss made. So yeah, it's pretty cool. So let's go inside. Let me show you the mechanism, which is really interesting. And am I focused? Yes, I'm focused. Okay. So stopwatches are like other watches. They have a balance, which is this little rotating spring here that goes back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And a lot of stopwatches, almost all stopwatches I'm familiar with, have something called a hacking feature. And the hacking feature is a little piece of metal that reaches over and stops the wheel. So let me do that. Let me reach in here. This is a piece of wood. So so you can see that that's the wheel, and by having a hacking feature, if you have a watch where you pull out the stem and the second hand stops, that's called a hacking feature, and it allows you to synchronize your watch easily. So most stopwatches have a little hacking feature, so when you push the button, it releases that little wheel, and usually it gives a little push. And it gets it started quickly. For a stopwatch, you want it started instantly. So it gives it a little push to get it going. So that's how most stopwatches work. Now this stopwatch doesn't work that way. So this stopwatch has a feature where it's always running. So if you want to use this watch, you have to wind it up because it's probably going to be dead when you pick it up. So you wind it up and it's always running. It never ever stops. It's always ticking. And this wheel are always running all the time, okay? Now, this wheel right here is the second hand wheel. And you can see there's a tiny little gap between the two. And that's actually like a transmission. So when you press the button, it engages those two gears and it starts running. So there's no lag time. When this thing starts, it starts instantly. And so this feature is very, very common in chronographic watches, where you have one part of the watch that's keeping time and another part that acts as a stopwatch. They have this kind of transmission feature here, but I think it's unusual for stopwatches, at least the ones that I've seen. So I think that's really, really cool. So that's what I want to actually make the video all about, is this mechanism here, not the watch mechanism. Everybody knows how watches work, I think. But how does this chronometer part actually work, and how does the transmission work? So when you push the button once, it starts. You push the button twice, it stops. And you push the button a third time, it resets. So how do you get that functionality in this little section here, okay? And so let me just explain what we're looking at. So this is spinning, this is spinning, this is spinning, and this is going around once a minute, okay? So this is 1 revolution per minute, and it engages into this wheel, which is the second hand wheel. So the second hand wheel attaches directly to the second hand, okay? So the long shaft, and it attaches to the second hand. So if this wheel is, I'm sorry, my pointer is way up in the air. If this wheel is spinning, then the second hand is moving. So when the clutch engages, the second hand starts to spin. When the second hand starts to spin, it also turns this gear and it turns this gear. Now this gear connects to the minute hand, okay? That's that little wheel up here. All right, so watch the wheel down here, the one with gears, and there's one little tooth, and that one little tooth will engage You can see that wheel indexed just one tooth. There, it indexed one tooth. And if I go in the reverse direction there, you can see it back up in one tooth. So that tooth then goes all the way around. So once a minute, it goes and engages and clicks at one tooth. So that's, whoa, almost dropped on the floor. That's the way the minute hand works. How does it know how to do all these things? What's the logic in this thing, right? If it was an electronic circuit, you'd have to have a start, stop, and reset function. So how do you do that mechanically? And it's all done with this right here, okay? So let me try to explain that. So the first thing, make sure I'm exactly focused on it. So the first thing that we notice is that it's got these weird cutouts. So it's like a gear, but there's like these wide cutouts. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 cutouts here, right? And then down underneath, let me see if I can focus on that. So down underneath is a little ratchet. You can see those little teeth down there, a little ratchet, okay? So that's the easy thing to understand, is that when you push here, it pushes on this piece of metal. So watch, it pushes it and then lets go. So it pushes this, and that comes over here. Underneath is a little lever that's going to push that ratchet. So watch the ratchet wheel. So the ratchet wheel is going every time I click it, okay? And there's a little spring here. That little spring is for the pusher, okay? All right, so let's see here. Let's take a look at what function we are right now, okay? The first thing we're going to do is we're going to watch this wheel, okay? Now, the thing that's broken on this watch is this pivot. Okay, this shaft on this wheel has a pivot right here, and it's in a jewel. Okay, so this is a sapphire jewel. And the tiny little piece of metal that sticks up sheared off, so that's no longer there. So to repair this watch, I'd have to pull this gear out, pull the pin out, try to find a replacement pin, put that in, put it all back together, and oh, by the way, the little sapphire jewel is chipped as well. I think it would function even with the chipped jewel because it's chipped in an okay place, I think, but anyway, that's chipped as well. So this wheel is going to kind of not work right. It's going to be kind of wrong, okay? So just bear with me while I try to demonstrate this thing. Now, when I press on it, watch this wheel try to move towards this wheel, okay? And you can see they're now engaged, and this wheel is rotating, okay? So we've engaged the clutch. We've moved this wheel over to the right. It pivots off this point right here. So when it levers over here, it pivots on this point, and it moves this wheel in and out. And so now we're engaged. Well, we were engaged because the pivots, since this jewel is broken, it won't stay engaged for a very long time. There we go. So now it's rotating, right? So now that the actual thing is operating. And we can watch, maybe that little thing will come around. We can watch this gear make a minute. It came out again. I'll just have to show that to you. I think you understand once I show you the little thing, how it works, I think you'll understand it. Okay, so that's function one. So function one is that we need to engage the gears. Now, how does that happen? Well, it's this rod here. This rod here falls into one of the gaps. Okay, there's this little thing here, and it falls into this gap, which means it can move down, which means it can pivot, it can move in. So that little groove there and that little thing there, that's a cam, like a cam action. I'm going to press it again, and now it's gone to the next section, and now it's moved up, so it's disengaged the gear. So now this is still rotating, but now the clutch is disengaged, and this little gear will not turn any longer. So the stopwatch is now not counting any longer, right? So that's function number two, all right? Now function number two also disengages these two. It actually moves this gear down, and then it happens with this little lever here. And then actually this little lever moves over and jams up against the gear and stops the gear from moving. So even if you rattle the watch or spin it, it'll all stay good. So this is like a little braking mechanism. So that's cool. So that's number 2. So on one angle, this drops in and you engage. On the next one, that disengages, and then a secondary cam falls in. And that's this cam right here. If I can point to it, this cam right here falls in right there. And so it does that function of stopping the second hand and disengaging the minute hand. Now if I click it one more time, this one is going to fall into the groove. So now this fell in, and this lever, in fact there's 2 levers, one goes this way and one goes this way, they both move left. And they both jam against these 2 wheels. And let me see if I can kind of move that out of the way so you can see it. So there we go. You can see it. It's got those 2 hands, and they come over here and they press on those 2 wheels. Now those 2 little wheels have cams on them, and they press on those cams and they'll rotate them to the 0 point. So the stopwatch will 0 by having those 2 little hands push against the little cam that's on either one of these. So that's how the stopwatch functions. It's on, off, and a reset. And it all has to do with this little wheel down here, and these 3 cams. 1 cam to engage, 1 cam to freeze, and 1 cam to reset. So I just think it's just super, super cool. You know, who came up with this idea the first time? I think everybody has copied it by now, but it's just very elegant. And not only is it elegant in design, it's elegant in manufacturing as well. It's like, yeah, let's make everything sculpt these things so they look really, really pretty. Like they needed a spring for this one. They needed to push here. Actually, they probably wanted to push here, but this was in the way. And then so they said, well, we can push here. We'll put a little pivot and we'll push here, but there's no room to put in a spring. So the spring is this piece here. It comes all the way over to here. And so they just put it along a little piece, and they said, there you go, little spring at the end. It's okay that we have room down here, so let's go ahead and use it. This particular thing is pretty cool because it's a really long arm and it bends around this one. So it pivots around. That's cool. Anyway, I just think it's just super cool. It's very enjoyable. Let me disengage there so it'll run again. It wasn't running because this gear had jammed up and there was too much friction to keep the watch moving. But like I said, it runs all the time, and then these gears engage. So it's very cool. Wakmann 501 Breitling.